Today I'm going to put together the iCraft Scalloped Gatefold Album, and this looks very elegant. And I checked out the back of the box, as I usually do, where it shows you the number of pieces, and really it's very simple. There's a base piece, there's two pieces that go on either side, and those are the fold-overs for the cover, and then 8 pages. So this particular album has about 16 spots for photos or journaling. And you can see here they have a diagram on the back of what it will look like when you have it together, and also on the front. Now it does say that the set contains one set of 11 pieces each of black and craft cardstock. So essentially you can put together 2 albums out of this kit. And it also says this scrapbook can contain 21 photographs. So I'm not sure where they're coming up with 21, but we'll take a look at that. And the final size of the scrapbook, it says, would be 6 inches by 6.5 inches. So not a bad size. So when I opened up the package, there was an instruction sheet. This is kind of a hit and miss. I think maybe over time, as they develop their kits a little bit further, they will have an instruction sheet in each one. Again, I've already read this instruction sheet, and for this particular album, it looks like it's pretty easy to assemble, unlike a few of the other albums. And part of the problem is it's not that those albums are hard to put together. If you've been following my series, you will know that. But the instructions have some flaws in them, and I think that's because their native tongue is not English, and they're trying to write these in English. So, as all of their instructions start out with, they have a diagram and description of the number of pieces. And it says this kit contains 11 parts of craft and black paper each. And they show the craft on here, and they've got the pieces labeled. And then it goes through with the instructions. And I have done some pre-reading of this so that I don't stumble over putting it together. But as I said, I found this one very, very simple because there's not that much to the construction. So let's just put the instructions off to the side for now. And it said it had black and it had craft, and it does. And there's all the pieces for a black. But I'm going to put together the craft because I think it shows up a little better on camera. So they say there's a base piece, and I've labeled my pieces according to the diagram. There's the base piece. They call that number 1. And then there's 2 cover pieces, and one is the right cover and one is the left cover. And I also numbered those according to their diagram. Then these that are left over, there are 8 pages. Now things are already pre-scored for you, and I have done some pre-folding. So this has 2 score lines on each cover, so very simple to fold them over. You just have to make sure you fold them over the right way, because you want your left flap to attach this way, and you want your right flap to attach this way. So I have them both folded, and I've already put my double-sided tape on the hinge for each one of these, and I used my bone folder just to make sure they adhere. Now, you know, I have said before in the past that sometimes I find with this particular craft stock that they include in their kit that sometimes my double-sided tape doesn't hold that well. So I would suggest probably using a wet glue if that's a problem for you. I'm doing this one as the prototype, so essentially I'm not that concerned about how secure it is. When I do the next segment and do the decorating, I will use the black one, and I find that the double-sided tape sticks much better to that. But it doesn't hurt to use a wet glue as well, just for extra security. So I'm just going to take my tape off both these pieces. Maybe. Here we go. Okay. And I'm just going to put the left one down. Now, I think it might be easier if you fold this over the hinge and line it up with the bottom part. So the bottom of the hinge with the bottom of the base. And this is a little awkward when I have it in camera, so if I get my head in the way or put it in a funny position, please excuse me. So line that up best as I can. Make sure that it's straight. And so there's my left cover. And you can see here it creates a spine, and that's where the pages are going to go. So let's do the same thing on the other side. Fold that over. match up the bottom corner of each piece and line it up with the edge. Try to keep it straight. And there we go. And just varnish that down. Okay. So we now have the covers in place. Spines on the side. Pretty simple so far. So the next stage is to put the pages in, and according to the instructions, let's just get those out again. If you notice here in step 2, it says complete look of base attached to both covers. Okay, this is where the English breaks down, but basically they're showing you what I just showed you, what it should look like at this point. So step 3, attach the page on left cover on the pasting margin of left cover. Okay, and then similarly repeat the process for the other 3 pages on the left side. Alright, so easy enough. Even though the English is broken, I think I've got it figured out. I've already placed my tape on the hinge, and these hinges are scored. Maybe you can see it there better. I have not yet folded these over because I'm thinking what I want to do is, it might make it a little easier to simply line this up with the edge. Now, I'm thinking here, probably has to go on the inside, and maybe it's not that easy. Yeah, it would be. I just flip this around, and I'm going to line up the edge of my hinge here with the score line on the fold of the cover. So, and I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to line it up bottoms to bottoms and the hinged piece in. Now, I'm just going to carefully fold that on the score line, and I now have my first page in. So now the second page, we want to butt up to that fold, just like that. Fold it back and score it. Again, this is where I can see that wet glue might be better than double-sided tape, at least on the craft cardstock, because I think it would stick better. It initially sticks all right, but then you've got, this is in my way. Let's just fold this one back out of my way for a second. There we go. And we're going to butt this up to that previous page. Try to keep it straight. This is where you can go off a little crooked. And fold it on the score line. And then our last page for this side, there's 4 pages per side. And if you've done this right, okay. So I have the left side of the album. Pages are all in and secure. And now we're going to do the other side. So I'll do that off camera and be back in a second. Okay, so I have the whole album assembled. It didn't take long at all. It took about 5-10 minutes to do this. And I'll show you what it looks like now. So you have your 2 outside covers, and inside what I've done is I have alternated the pages when I close it up. So 1 page this way, 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 1 page this way. And the reason for doing that is because I think when you get 3D embellishments on it, it will let the album sit a little flatter than if you put all the pages on top of each other like this. So it did say that there's room for 21 pictures. Well, we have 4 pages on this side, and we have 4 pages on this side. I'm trying to ignore my clock. And so that would give me 8 here and 8 here. That's 16. 1 in the middle. That's 17. I suppose you could put 1 here. 18. 19. Okay, they say 21. So I guess you could put 1, 20, 21 on the outside covers, I guess. I think that's stretching it a little bit because I don't think I want to put my pictures, well, you might, on the outside cover. But anyways, you do have the possibility of getting in 19 pictures anyways. So that's all there is to putting this together. Now the next stage of this is going to be my background papers. Now, I think in the case of this album, I'm going to do what I have done with other albums, and that is before I assemble the album, I think I'm going to put on my background pages. It's going to be easy enough on these, on the pages themselves, to do that, but we got a little problem with the covers because these I'm not going to be able to cut out as straight lines. So I think I'm going to have to use the cover pages and the base page as a template for cutting out my background papers. So I think it would be easier to do that when the album hasn't been assembled yet. So in the next segment, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut out my background papers and I'm going to adhere them, and I'll show you how that works. So now I have put the background papers onto the gatefold album. Now I did this off camera because basically it's just gluing after you've got the pages cut. Now how did I cut these pages? Okay, so I went along with my Cricut Maker and I tried different methods for creating these pages on the outside and on the back and on the inside. And you see you've got these curved pieces up here, which don't lend themselves to being made in the Cricut Maker that readily. In fact, what I ended up doing, to make a long story short, was I created a template. And what I simply did was I took the black part of the album before I had put it together, traced it on a piece of white cardstock, and then I just marked in here about 1/4 of an inch all the way around, drew that line, and cut it out. And that way I have 1/8 of an inch of a border pretty much all the way around the outside of this album. So then I used a Gorilla Glue to glue these down, and an afterthought was I put these magnets in here just to keep it secured. Now you could put a ribbon around this, and if you did, I would recommend that you put the ribbon on before you put this piece on so that the ribbon would go underneath and will give it more support. But whatever method you want, there's probably other methods you could use as well. I also made a template for the back cover as well, because trying to get that 1/4 inch in my Cricut Maker was not working at all. So here's what it looks like with the background pages on it. It's pretty simple, really, this album. So I've got these inside covered pieces, and then I have my pages. Now I did use the Cricut to cut out these pages. You don't have to have a Cricut Maker to do this. You could just measure it out for yourself and use your paper trimmer. And then the corners are rounded, and if you want the corners rounded, just use your corner rounder for those. So here you can see all the pages are in, and I picked my page or my cardstock from a collection that's in my stash, and I'm trying to use up my stash, as you know. And this is the paper album that I used, or the paper collection. Now this is a really old one. I think I got it, looking at the price tags, I think I bought it at a surplus store quite some time ago. It is by K & Company. They do make very nice quality papers, and they've been around for years. And this one was called Classic K, I guess. And these papers were double-sided, so you can see. And I've still got quite a few of these left. So this is sort of a vintage floral look. And that's what I decided to use in this particular album. So the one thing too is putting all of these background papers onto your pages before you actually assemble the album is a really good idea. Now you saw previously how to assemble the album, so I didn't bother showing you this part of it again. But it makes a nice little album. And now the next stage of this And you'll notice that I'm folding the pages opposite to each other. It just makes it lay a little flatter if you do this. So the next stage in this album is actually embellishing the pages themselves. And that's what we'll do in the next segment. Okay, so I have embellished the Scalloped Gatefold album, and I did something a little different this time from what I usually do. I was kind of stretching my imagination as to how I could embellish this, and so I'll show you what I did, and then I'm going to explain some other things that I did that were actually mistakes that I had to correct. First off, as you can see, I put a bow around this because I've used some 3D embellishments, and it does make it a little bit on the thick side. So to keep it held open, or closed that is, I added this. Now this was a piece of trim off of something else, a project that I'd done a long time ago. Had this laying around, and it works very well on here. Now to reinforce it, I did glue it. Luckily it has this little spine piece. I did glue it again with my favorite glue, the Gorilla Clear Glue, Super Glue, and that's just reinforcing it on the back. So let's open this up and I'll show you what I've done. Okay, so here's my front covers, and as you know, it's a gatefold, so one piece goes over top the other. Now, originally, back in the second segment of this, you saw me put a couple of magnets on here. And I left those magnets. Actually, I had to readjust them, and I'll explain why in a bit. But just to close it. But it's not, doesn't hold it together very well. Magnets aren't that strong. So that's why I added this piece of ribbon. Excuse me. On here you can see I have a collage of Victorian graphics. Now, where did I get these? And you're going to see more of them inside. I get graphics from a website called Graphics Fairy, and I've been collecting them. And I think I mentioned them in one of my vlogs earlier about Graphics Fairy, that every Friday they will send you out a set of free graphics, and they're copyright free, and you can use them whatever way you want. And they're great. They're usually very vintagey, very Victorian in style. So what I did with all the graphics you'll see in this album is I uploaded them to the Cricut Maker, and then I had the Cricut Maker print them out. Well, the Cricut Maker doesn't do the printing, your printer does. But then the Cricut Maker knows where to cut these out. So I did not have to fussy cut these. These were fussy cut by the Cricut Maker, which it does take a little time, but not as much time as to fussy cut them out, especially when you see how many I have. I also decided to add another layer of dimension to this album, and this is where I had a problem, which I'm going to discuss in a moment, by adding some metal embellishments that I have in my stash. A lot of these are jewelry pieces that I pull apart, junk jewelry. I go to my local charity store and I pick up some really cheap junk jewelry, and I pull them apart to use the various elements. So that's what you can see right here on the cover. And then, of course, when you open this up, you've got the next part of the gatefold technique. Now, if I'd been a little smarter, I would have used flatter magnets and I would have buried them underneath this graphic, but I didn't think about that at the time. So you can see my magnets. Now, what I could do to cover these up is take a little thin paper flower, a little paper one, and just stick it on both of these, and it would add as an extra embellishment to it, and the magnets would still probably work through if I made the paper thin enough. I did go through my stash and found some 3D elements, flowers, you'll see them throughout, and some butterflies, and I added those two to each of the pages. Now, what makes this album a little unique is the way that I set it up. There is real estate in here for photographs in behind here on the big part. So you could tuck in a picture or two or a larger journaling card, because each of these that you're going to see I made as a pocket. Now, how did I do that? Well, rather than sticking these on all at once, I created a band, which you can't really see very well, but it runs under here. I created a little band from some of my scrapbook paper in my stash and rounded the corners of it. And then, before I mounted it to the page, I actually mounted these elements onto it. And so you can see these elements, if I pull these little cards out, I'll explain these in a minute, you can see that this creates the pocket. And these are above the band a little bit. So that gives it some place to tuck in things. So I did every page like this. And the idea here is if you have a 4x6 picture or something, or smaller, you can tuck it right in the back there if you want. You could also tuck in a larger journaling page as well. But these little cards are also from Graphics Fairy. And I just had Adobe Photoshop Elements print these out. I cut them out. Actually, I went through the organizer in Photoshop Elements, and it allowed me to print out pages of these multiple in the same size. And I just put my paper trimmer, trimmed them down, and I went around the edges with some Oxide Vintage Photo ink just to give them a little bit more dimension. And they just tuck right in here. But the thing is, the backs are blank. So again, small pictures or journaling or whatever could be mounted on those too. So you see, you get a lot of real estate here for a lot of different elements. On the two flat pages, I actually made a pocket out of two of these cards, mainly because I couldn't think of anything else to do and I had some extras left over, and another loose card that tucks underneath. Again, just an area where you could drop in a picture, a small picture. Now, one thing about creating these pockets, you don't want to use double-sided tape. The reason is some of these cards can get stuck under that edge. It doesn't seal perfectly, and then they'll stick and they'll be difficult to get in and out. So I just used glue. Now I used the Dries Clear Art Glitter Glue, and I just did a thin bead around 3 sides of the pocket and put that in, and that way these don't stick. You'll also notice I added some more of my 3D embellishments here, some of my jewelry pieces and this little bee, and you'll see this throughout. So this is how it works. So what you have are each of the pages done in exactly the same way with different elements, lots of cards tucked in behind in each panel. Some more of those 3D embellishments. Some of them are jewelry pieces. And the last page. Now, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but you're going to say, wait, I thought this album had about 16 pages, like 4 of these on one side, 4 of these on the other side, made 8. It did. But here's where I made a mistake. This actually wasn't so much a mistake. I kind of knew this was probably going to happen, but I got carried away with the 3D embellishments, and it wouldn't allow the booklet to close. It bowed out like drastically, like almost like a semicircle. So I was trying to think, what could I do about that? Well, the only solution I could come up with was to remove some of the pages, and I did. Luckily, they came out fairly easily. I did damage the spine along here. I took a black magic marker, a Sharpie, and just went over it so that it blends in. When you look at it up close, though, it does look a little rough. Now, if I wanted to, what I could do is probably take some washi tape in the same theme as what I'm using here, the Victorian style, and just put it down along these seams, and that would cover that up without any problem. So that's what I did, and that was my mistake. And actually, if we go back to the cover, right here, these were already on pages that were in the album before, and I was thinking, what can I put on the outside of the album? Well, I just pulled these off of those pages and re-adhered them to the cover pieces. So overall, I think it turned out pretty nice. It took a while to create. I didn't do it on camera because I think it's pretty evident from the way I've described it. And, you know, when you embellish something, everybody has their own method for it. Also, I do not tie bows very well. One thing I don't like about this album is that it's a little bit on the flimsy side. That's because of the construction paper that the pockets are cut on. And I find that it shifts down here. The pages kind of move a little bit, and that kind of bothers me. And I'm not sure what I could do about that to stop it. But I'm not going to really worry about that at the moment. But just to be aware of that, maybe if I put in some chipboard in the spines, as I'm building the pages, that might make it a little sturdier and then it won't shimmy from side to side. That's a possibility, but that would be something you'd have to do as you're constructing the album, not at the time of when you're embellishing it. So I'm not going to worry about it right now because this is done. So that was the Scalloped Gatefold Album by iCraft. And I will put the entire 3-part series for this up as a separate video. It'll be in one of my playlists on my channel called iCraft Kits. So you don't have to sit through, if you ever want to do this on your own, you don't have to sit through 3 different vlogs. It'll all be contained in one video. So I hope you enjoyed this kit. And the next kit we're going to work on is the iCraft Garden View album, and it's got this neat front to it, and you can see it looks like it's pretty simple to put together. In fact, I don't even think there's any folding. There's no score lines on it. Looks like you got to use those binder rings for it. So this should be kind of fun, and it looks like it's going to give us a lot of real estate. So that's next time.